Okay, so we are starting our last panel, which is dedicated to the Russia's internal stability. So, is Russia's internal stability safe? And we have a great number of fantastic speakers, and also the fantastic Discussant. I would not take your time with declaring them all. And just let's start in the order which is listed in the program. So first, Edward Holland, please.
Okay, thank you everybody. Thanks for PONARS for organizing, and thanks for the endurance of the audience. The memo is about the possibility of the breakup of the Russian Federation. And I'm positioning that argument against a recognition that in the last 2 decades under Vladimir Putin, we've seen 2 key processes. One is political centralization, and that includes the merging of ethnic regions with surrounding Russian territories. And the other is economic stability. As such, I think that the likelihood of the breakup of the Russian Federation had declined precipitously up until February 2022. Of course, with the war, the argument that I make in the memo is that we need to revisit this possibility. I still view the breakdown of the Russian state as unlikely. I'll detail why that is the case as I go forward with the memo. Regardless, I think it should be acknowledged by policymakers as a potential outcome of the war, depending on how the war ends. In the memo, I'm positioning this argument against some of the academic literature that appeared in the 1990s on these themes. Many of these ideas, I'm sure, are familiar to those of us in the audience. This includes the Parade of Sovereignties, Yeltsin's call in August 1990 for the regions of Russia to take as much sovereignty as they can swallow. Some of the other ideas that I'm thinking about are matryoshka nationalism or matryoshka identities, thinking about Ian Bremmer and Ray Terrace's formulation of the idea that Russia's territories frequently were pursuing higher status, the next size up, so to speak, in the matryoshka nesting dolls. And of course we know about Tatarstan, we know about Chechnya in this process, but I would also highlight Adygea, Karachay, Cherkessia, Khakassia, places that were autonomous oblasts that secured the status of autonomous republics. In sum, I think at the time, the challenge of ethno-territorial organization was existential for the Russian state. And I would quote Jean Radvani, a French geographer, who wrote in 1992, quote, "Russia has never known an existence other than that of its empire. The present borders of the Russian Federation hardly correspond to those of natural, historical, or economic boundaries." And so in the memo, I'm primarily thinking about the Russian republics. I should and I will briefly acknowledge other potential regional breakdowns for Russia. One of the most prominent is the Siberian Agreement, which was detailed by James Hughes in an article in Europe Asia Studies in 1994. And the Siberian Agreement is organized after Yeltsin's call to take as much sovereignty as possible in November 1990. And its aim is to organize Siberian interests in the creation of an interregional structure that could appeal to the center as possible, given the transitional nature of the Russian state at that time. So going on to speaking about the republics, the potential for Russia's breakdown today in light of the conflict in Ukraine. I want to highlight a couple of themes, but before I do so, I want to briefly touch on commentaries that have appeared about the possibility of this breakup in the last year and a half. Many of these build on these ideas and themes of decolonization. And those of us that will attend the ACES conference next month in Philadelphia, that is the theme for the conference. Considering this idea of decolonization, I really want to highlight 2 arguments. The first is the role of subsidies in maintaining the stability of the Russian state. You can see in the chart, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. The second is the way in which members of some of Russia's national minorities have organized politically in the last year and a half in pursuit of a range of goals. And some of these groups are organizing to support diaspora communities that have become increasingly prominent as a result of the war. Some are advocating for outright independence. So subsidies. So subsidies is a form of budgetary transfer from the federal center to the regions. I think these have played a very important role in ensuring economic stability throughout the Federation during Putin's rule. I want to compare data for 2 years. 2013 is the year before the annexation of Crimea. 2023 is the most recently available data. We've seen total subsidies rise over that 10-year period from just under 500 billion rubles to 822 billion rubles. I acknowledge that there's a lot of caveats to those figures and those numbers, but I will put them out there for argumentative purposes. By annexing Crimea, Russia added 2 territorial units to the Federation, the Republic of Crimea, but also the city of Sevastopol. Sevastopol is 51st in the 2023 data in terms of subsidies. Crimea is 7th. Okay? Among other territories in the top 10 in 2023, those include Dagestan, Chechnya, Buryatia, and Tuva. I highlight these regions because many of them, each of them has served as key recruiting grounds for soldiers in Russia's war effort in Ukraine. I think that there's a really important calculus that's going on here in terms of support for the regions and for the national republics in particular. Those have to do, of course, with the demographic needs of the Russian army. Many of these places, for example, Dagestan, are among the few Russian regions that have grown demographically over the last intercensal period. Okay. So I'll highlight just briefly the role in which the organization of minority communities outside of Russia has played in ensuring the stability of the Russian state. We have a variety of organizations that have organized, and their goals, again, vary from full independence to supporting diaspora communities. A lot of my work has been in Kalmykia. I'll highlight the Free Kalmyk Foundation, which is dedicated, quote, to addressing the needs and challenges faced by the growing Kalmyk community in the United States. A really interesting and delimited organizational goal for the Free Kalmyk Foundation. At the other end of the spectrum, we have Free Del Ural, which was established in Kyiv in 2018, which advocates for full autonomy for the Russian republics along the Volga River. One of the key challenges here, of course, is the expatriate nature of these groups, which likely limits their voice within Russia. So to reach a conclusion, I think that my argument in the memo is that revisiting some of the literature from the early 2000s, the possibility of Russia's breakdown along ethnic lines is non-zero. That doesn't mean it's much more than non-zero. But I want to highlight in the memo this possibility, some of the conditions that could lead to that breakdown, and really try to draw into the conversation some of the regions that are quite important to the Russian state today, both in terms of mobilization, in terms of protests and opposition, as we've seen on our Twitter feeds, Dagestan, and the events there the last day or so. So thanks everybody, I'll end there, and look forward to questions and comments.
Natalia, Forrat, University of Michigan.
Hi everyone. Thank you for staying until this panel. We really appreciate whatever audience we have. So my memo, my presentation is going to be about 2020 protests in Belarus and the lessons that we can learn from them. I think it speaks to a wider topic about how we can challenge autocrats and how we can challenge their framings. So this memo is based on the report that you see, the title page of that report, which I did with colleagues from Freedom House. And it is part of a larger study where we studied recent cases of civic mobilization in authoritarian countries. So some of the patterns that I'm going to talk about, we actually saw happening across cases, and I'll be happy to talk in Q&A about that too. So just a very quick reminder about the events in Belarus, because they happened before the full-scale invasion into Ukraine, Russian invasion into Ukraine, and that kind of feels like the previous period of history. So in 2020, Belarus had a scheduled presidential election, and Alexander Lukashenko was challenged by 3 new players, political players. These political players were Sergei Tsikhanovsky, Viktor Babaryka, and Valer Tsepkalo. They mobilized a lot of support over a very short period of time, which was really unexpected. And the question I'm asking is, how did it become possible? So the argument I'm developing in the memo is that one of the factors, not the only one, but one of the main factors that contributed to this scaling up of mobilization was the new framing that the opposition suggested. And that new framing had a new, renewed vision of the nation that was based on the ideas of collective solidarity, fairness, equality, and progress. This new framing contrasted to the framing that the old opposition was suggesting, which focused more about the questions such as, should Belarus go with the West of Russia, or what should be the question of Belarusian language in the public space in Belarus, which was somewhat removed from what the majority of people cared about. It was not the only factor that contributed to the unpopularity of the old opposition. Of course, there was a lot of repression, but that was one of the factors. So the new framing that these opposition candidates suggested, I argue, it resonated with part of the already existing Soviet ethos that was pretty strong in Belarus. With the Soviet ethos and also with the image of Belarusians as a nation, because if we look at how they characterize themselves and how scholars that studied the Belarusian identity write about it, we will see that they characterize themselves as a peaceful nation, as a tolerant nation, as really, that's why some of the scholars actually characterize that identity as thin, but it turns out that this new framing seemed to really resonate very well with how Belarusians thought about themselves. So let me elaborate a little bit on the specific manifestations, empirical manifestations of that framing. Because the campaign in Belarus, if you remember, didn't really go that far before all of those new challengers were basically banned from running in one way or the other. So we mostly remember that campaign because of Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya and her political agenda of fair election. And that political agenda, very simple one, definitely speaks to the values of fairness, of equality, of equal opportunities. That's pretty obvious. But the basis for that agenda and the basis for a new vision of the nation was actually laid by the other candidates, the original challengers, by Babaryka, by Tsepkalo, and by Tsikhanovsky. So what did Babaryka do to do that? He didn't, as I said, really campaign that much, but we can look at his previous actions and his previous public speeches about how he saw Belarus. So he advanced, if you remember, if you know, he wasn't just a banker, he was also a philanthropist. And he did a lot of different things to, a lot of different kinds of projects that supported social causes, public causes, cultural initiatives, etc., etc. So through his actions and his speeches, he advanced the vision of the nation that was, first it was pretty pragmatic on foreign policy. So unlike the opposition that was arguing, should we go with the West, should we go with Russia? Babaryka didn't really say we should be ideological in that, or we should choose one way or the other. he was very much standing on pragmatic positions. We should care about our own development. We should care about our own prosperity. We should develop all kinds of connections that actually contribute to our prosperity. We should do it with the West, we should do it with Europe, we should do it with Russia as well. So another thing that another feature of the nation that he imagined was authenticity and inclusivity. So if we look at the cultural projects that he supported, they were not focused on Belarus ethnicity. They were not focused on Belarus language, although he definitely supported all kinds of projects related to Belarus language and Belarus ethnicity, but he also embraced all the other contributors to Belarus culture. For example, he brought the paintings of the artists that were from Belarus, whatever ethnicity they were, and who went to Europe, to other countries to create their artworks. And he brought a lot of them, he bought a lot of them and put it into the public gallery so that people can be proud of their own cultural heritage, which is not necessarily Belarus ethnicity and Belarus folk songs. He financed publishing of many copies of Svetlana Alexievich works, because she, even though she wrote in Russian, she was a Belarus author, and he suggested embracing it. This is part of our cultural heritage. So he also thought about the nation as contributing to the world culture and economy. That was pretty obvious from his speeches, and the nation as a solidary nation. He was financing a lot of philanthropy, a lot of social projects that were pursuing social causes. So that all contributed to this idea of solidarity. And Tsapkal and Tikhanovsky also in different ways contributed to the same kind of vision. The last point I'm going to make is that, ironically, the same kind of vision of a nation very much benefited Lukashenko when he was young, when he was a young politician in the 90s. Coming out from the Soviet Union, he was also thinking about progress because he was a relatively entrepreneurial director of a sovkhoz. He was talking about solidarity and equality because he was very much in favor of keeping the welfare state, and he was talking about fairness. He was an anti-corruption politician. He was running on anti-corruption matters. So the point is that there is a deeply seated vision of the nation, or deeply seated set of values that don't change that much over time. And it is possible to take them, to take some of the parts of that Soviet ethos, some of the parts that are still there, and rethink them and make them work for a democratic cause. And what we see across cases, across other cases, is that the framings that actually actively engage with the existing values that autocrats also frequently engage with and rethink those values, they tend to do better, they tend to attract more support than the framings that are actually directly confrontational with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stewart, Knox College.
Good afternoon, everyone. Like many of my colleagues on the panel, I'm going to take a look at one of Russia's regions, in particular Karelia. So Finland recently joined NATO, and a lot of the discourse around that and around Russia's recent full-scale invasion into Ukraine is that, from the realist perspective, NATO sort of is a threat against Russia's security as a whole, right? So the more countries join NATO, the more under threat Russia feels, and so this is one of the primary causes of conflict, right? So with Finland's accession to NATO, we should expect that Finland will sort of become more of a threat to Russia. It'll enter into this sort of discourse of Finland is now an enemy, part of that NATO threat coming towards us. But a lot of these arguments, and I'm sure many of you work on this in the room, miss a lot of the other connections that exist between countries, and not just between countries at that central government level, but at that sub-state relationship as well. Things like economics, culture, and sort of people-to-people ties. Right? So that's what I'm going to look into in Karelia. Do we see this shift in discourse about, is Karelia still a country we can cooperate with? Is it now a threat? And look at how the local perspective may or may not shift on that. So there's been a shift over the years to recognize the importance of sometimes called sub-state international relationships, sometimes air diplomacy, but recognizing that these relationships are also important in how global affairs works. We can think of fellow PONARsians, Sheriff and Granny, looking at Tatarstan and air diplomacy and acting like a state there. So I propose it's really important to look at how these broad international trends actually play out sort of on the ground, in particular in border regions like Karelia. So Karelia has been engaged in a lot of cooperative efforts with Karelia and with the EU in general over the years through formalized institutions and through less formalized cultural organizations. So for instance, there's a Karelian cross-border cooperation program where there's funding provided by the EU as a partnership program looking at culture, economic development, sort of cross-border ties in general, that sort of engaged a lot of cooperation across that border. Similar with the Barents Euro-Atlantic Council and the Barents Regional Council that Karelia was a part of as well. There are things like political integration, right, with the Finnish consulate in Petsavots. And then, like I mentioned, at that civil society level as well, things like the Karelia-Finland Friendship Society, the Congress of Karls that looks at not only the importance of preserving Karl culture language, but also recognizing Finns and Vets as part of that Karelian local community. And same thing with young Karelia. And of course the economic ties with Finland being one of Karelia's most important trade partners until this past year. So what I'd argue is that some of these pre-existing partnerships and relationships between Karelia and Finland may prove durable even with Finland's accession to NATO. That doesn't automatically transform Finland into enemy security threat type of terms. So what I look at in this policy memo is an analysis of sort of two different medias. Right? So one is, what is the official internet portal of the Republic of Karelia saying about Finland? And what is Kubernia Daily saying about this as well? So I picked this internet newspaper because it has potential to be not really oppositional, because oppositional media is not, in the current context, allowed to flourish. But its chief editor has been sort of fined for electoral interference, what the Republic said. He was also a member of the regional legislature from the Jabloko party. So I expect if there's a different sort of discourse about Finland, it might be more likely to be in this internet paper. So I look at 4 different time periods to try to see how this perspective of Finland has or hasn't changed. And so before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, between that invasion and NATO application period, from NATO application to accession, and then since Finland has joined NATO. Looking at what are the different topics of these articles that mention Finland, what's the view of that relationship? Is it cooperative? Is it conflictual? Is it just neutral? And lastly, the importance of Finland to that article. So I'm going to focus mostly today on that official internet portal, the Republic of Karelia, because this is still a work in progress. And one interesting thing of note is that the percentage of articles that mention Finland has really declined over the course of these 4 time periods. So going from 2.3% of articles mentioning Finland to just 0.19%. So not only has the sort of content and tone of those articles changed, but Finland has sort of dropped out of the official discourse coming out of that internet portal from the Republic of Karelia. So just a few things I want to point out from this table here. I think something that's really interesting is sort of even before that NATO application that Finland made, we see that shift from mostly cooperative articles, 74%, very few conflictual articles, to about 1/3 of articles being of a conflictual nature after that invasion of Ukraine. And so what sticks out to me here is very similar to what the second panel was talking about this afternoon, some of the economic implications of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Right? So it's not necessarily that Finland joining NATO is what is providing a threat to Russia, but some of the breakdowns in these other economic relationships that the region has had. Right? So we're seeing that shift not centered around NATO, but centered around breakdowns in those economic ties with sanctions. In terms of the topic and content of those articles, before the invasion, about half of them were about culture. It was about the consul, the Finnish consul Sunovets, building a kantele, sort of traditional Karl instrument, about sort of joint museum cooperation, joint concerts, things like that, and cooperative economic relationships of trade. So since then, culture has really dropped out steadily from the content of those articles, and instead, we again see this focus on the economic relationship and shifting from one in which we see trade cooperation into one of more conflict and import substitution. Right? So for example, this article came out just after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and before the EU cut the cross-border cooperation funding. And at this time, Finland was engaged in a partnership with Karelia, and the Karelian government was looking forward to continued partnership through that CBC program. Shift a couple months, or a month or so later, and now we're seeing import substitution type of discussion that Finland is no longer a partner in these economic ties, but now Karelia is sort of going it alone. So I have more to talk about in the Q&A. I'm now running out of time here. So just to wrap up, we, in the Karelian government's dialogue, we are seeing a shift of Karelia as sort of not a cooperative partner, but of a conflictual relationship, and not necessarily one of a security threat like you might expect with NATO. Instead, it's more focused on sort of this shifting economic type of relationship. So thank you, and look forward to more discussion.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Polina. And Polina, and you all probably you will forgive me that I will remain seated since I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so and I'm going to talk about Center regional relations in Russia, and my question is are there any signs of erosion of the model of Center regional relations in Russia? And I would like to start with a kind of strong, probably too strong statement that this stability or resilience of the Center regional relations in Russia is probably the most, or at least one of the most important conditions of continuation of this war. Imagine if the regions would be against, or if they would not support as actively as they do the continuation of the war, if they wouldn't be that patriotic, wouldn't be able to continue the war. I doubt it very much. And the regions also feed the war with the manpower. Where the manpower comes from? From Moscow? No, this is from the regions. So this is that much important, you know, to see what's going on with this relationship. And I can tell you that, you know, my interest to this, I'm observing for many years. I'm observing and trying to examine, to analyze the Central regional relations. And first I was thinking, oh, how great. You know, this was before the annexation of Crimea. I thought how skillfully the autocracy, the Russian autocracy, can use the institutions originally designed for democracies, meaning federalism and decentralization. But then, after the annexation, and even more so after the outbreak of the war, my interest was more practical, I would say. So it was how to undermine this. So what are the policy implications of this? So the main question is, what are the limits of the resilience of this model? You know, because now we're not talking about stability of these relations. This was before the crisis, also before the COVID-19 crisis. But now this is about resilience. Because again, this resilience, this is what makes the war. First, we need to. I would need to tell some words about the model. We know this model, you know, and it's interesting, you know. On the section with Uliana on Ukraine, we just mentioned the decentralization. right? Like the Ukraine acquires resilience through decentralization, and Russia, on the contrary, took through centralization, or through this kind of centralization, which is not centralization as a power vertical. It's because power vertical is a primitive thing, while this is not a primitive thing. It's a very kind of sophisticated thing because it is extreme political centralization. You know, all the strategic decisions are made in Moscow and by Moscow, by the presidential administration. But at the same time, each dictator, even the personal dictator, needs to share power. And we have very good literature saying why and how do the modern dictators, how do they share power? So, and in the country as territorially large and diverse, you would need to share power because it would be unpractical and also impossible to hold everything in Moscow. So power vertical means power vertical, you know, just, but it means extreme political centralization, but indifference from the Moscow to a lot of results and a lot of things which the original incumbents are kind of making in doing in their regions. And what is important that the regional governors sometimes they are kind of presented as the victims of the Putin political regime, which is absolutely not the case because they are the stakeholders. They're even not the agents, if you want to use the principal agent model. They are the stakeholders. These actors, those interests are in most of the cases fully aligned with the interests of Moscow. That's why they accept what Moscow is doing to them, and what now I come to what is Moscow is doing to them. This repertoire, which Moscow tries in terms of in times of the shock of crisis, that was 4 minutes. Okay, I thought it would be 2. Oh. 4 minutes is good. So this is what Moscow tries to do was kind of invented and implemented during the times of the COVID-19 crisis. So what was then? The Putin distance, right? The Putin distance, and then to the fore, who go to the fore? So to the regional governors who had to hold the political stability and to navigate through the most difficult thing, you know, region by region, with a lot of the variation of how you can navigate the lockdown, at the same time kind of preserving some freedom for business, not to ruin the local economy, because you are also kind of responsible for the local economy. And also one of the most important points, also a lot of good literature about this is manipulation of statistics. This is what they were doing about the mortality rates during the COVID-19 pandemic. So what has been done? It was how I call it regionalization of the crisis. Regionalization, you know, between the regions. However, it was very different after the war started. Very different kind of shock, you know. So Putin could not distance from this crisis. It was not possible to distance because it was Moscow who did all these things. So the idea was different. Это наша победа. Наша, I stress the word наша. Это наша победа. Это наша задача. So we are all kind of together, but again, more responsibilities to the region. So this was repeated. However, the rhetoric was very different. And what was also what Moscow, not traditional governance, skillfully was using these regional imbalances and asymmetries between the regions, because I'm talking about this asymmetrical conscript. That you don't take the people, that you take disproportionately less people from the Moscow and St. Petersburg, you know, to the war, while you put the burden of the conscript, of the mobilization, to the smaller ethnic republics which don't have any records of protests. Any records of protests, you know? So this was, for me, it was a combination. So COVID-19 helped, in a way, COVID-19 helped to build this repertoire of how you hold the system resilient. Because it's not about stability, it's about resilience. And this is really different qualities. So how you have it during this crisis, and where you have to help in the COVID-19, but partially. And partially it would need to be kind of invented from scratch. And my last point, Polina is the last point. So this system is not to reform. This model, which was built, which was completed before the war, and even before the annexation of Crimea, is not to be reformed. It will be there. It can be, you know, the main variable how to reform it would be the change, the main and the only, the change of the Russian political regime. You know, however, you know, I have at least 2 points to which we could look to see if they are, and I just propose them to you just as ideas, because this is, for me, it's ever-going research. I think I will do it until I die. You know, I will always look at the Russian regions, what they're doing. you know, because this is already, I have this legacy, so many years of doing this thing. So, I mean, so just to, what could we look at? First, I would propose to look at the probably new legitimacy of the governance, because this is much more, so this is more and more people involved in how I call it the circle of war. The circle of war is expanding. More and more children, more and more families, more and more wives, more and more widows, you know, in the regions which are getting the social patronage from the governors who are responsible for this. And look at the results of the elections. And you will see that I understand what kind of elections they were, but still, you know, so this is here it would probably be the sign that the governors have their own legitimacy, that probably in the future they could use as a bargaining chip against Moscow in the different conditions. This is one thing, and the second thing, this is the growing difference between the regions, and the main creator of this difference is the war, and their geographical proximity to the front line, right? Because this is those who are very close to the war, and these are those who are very far from the war. And look, we could see there the regions who actually benefited from the war, and these are the regions of the Far East, you know, to whom the redistribution is made. So they are very far from the war, and they have this redistribution. So I don't know, again, how meaningful are these differences, and how meaningful is this accumulation of the popular legitimacy, and how sustainable are these trends. But still, if we want at least to make some kind of policy thing out of an academic thing, probably we could use, you know, you could look at these things and see if this is just like this, or these are sustainable trends, which we will observe and which will be kind of strengthened. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And finally, Mr. Arnold.
Okay, so thank you for sticking with me to the last presentation. My presentation is Cossacks as a case study in Russia's paramilitarization. This presentation comes from, it's built on a report that I published with Sakankin and Wenga for the SONAC, part of the UK Ministry of Defence in 2023. And I have to acknowledge that funding from that source indirectly financed this presentation. So the question I'm going to answer is, or ask, is how does the registered Cossack movement exemplify trends in paramilitarization? And I'm going to define paramilitarization as, first of all, it's a concept that has porous overlap with the concept of militarization, but the difference is that it's from ostensibly, at least ostensibly, non-state structures. And we define this as having demand and supply sides to paramilitarization. Now, the registered Cossacks are but one group, and there's a broader context of paramilitarization going on here. Of course, we all know about Wagner, but there's a plethora of other smaller private military companies growing in Russia, including Redut, Convoy, Sword, Shield, Flame, Potok, the Akhmat, PMC. There are also regional militias, now even the Russian Orthodox Church has its own PMC, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means. So I'm going to look at the Russian registered Cossacks. I wish I had a better slide up there, so you can see the names more clearly. But the register, the Cossack movement began in 1990 with some ethnic Cossacks agitating for recognition as being a repressed people by the Soviet Union. By 1995, they had succeeded in creating a register, but really that laid in, the powers of that laid in doldrums. It was a register signed up for state service, which is actually Polish. Their powers were expanded under 2005 and 2012, and in 2014 the Kuban Cossacks played an important role in the annexation of Crimea, coming over and suppressing dissidents. The regime so at this time there were 11 Cossack hosts. There are 12 now. The 12th has been created in the Black Sea. It's the Chernomorskaya Vojska. We're really exemplifying a way in which Russia is consolidating its hold on new territories. Indeed, there are plans for a Cossack host to be put in Zaporizhia, one in Kherson, and these are registered Cossack hosts. The difference between a registered Cossack and an ancestral Cossack is that pretty much anyone who professes to be a Cossack can join a registered Cossack unit. And for this reason, they're known as, I think it translates as clownish. Clownish Cossacks or asphalt Cossacks. And there is a big difference from the ancestral Cossacks, which is important as a source of how many people they can put out. But 2018, we saw the creation of the All-Russian Cossack Society led by Nikolai Deluda, who is in fact former Ataman of the Kuban Cossack Society. And you can see the names up there. I can go into those later if you're more interested. So, why does this matter today? Well, there are 25,000 Cossacks currently fighting in the special military operation. This is a huge increase on the initial numbers. As I've written before, there are actually signs that Deluda knew about the timing of the invasion and was preparing Cossacks to once again become a shield for the country. So we have 25,000 Cossack fighters, and that number looks like it's going to grow. That makes them the largest autonomous, or at least ostensibly autonomous, military structure, which I know in fighting in Ukraine right now. How are they organised? This is the demand side again. How are they organised? They're organised through the BARS system, which is a reserve system like the US Army Reserve or UK Territorials. The advertised salaries that they receive are high for the regions, but there have been complaints that they're not always paid, and reportedly there are 32 BARS units in Ukraine. Reports vary around the exact number, but 18 of them are Cossack. And I should mention, just going back to these sites, each one of these organisations maintains their own website, as does the central VSKO. They maintain their own website and they publish this information on their websites, and so all these numbers have come from their own websites. So by region we have 3 battalions from the Kuban Cossacks, 3 from the Karelia Cossacks in Stavropol, 2 from the Rostov Cossacks, the Don Cossacks, 1 from the Black Sea, 1 from Arenberg, 1 from Volga and Arenberg combined, 1 from the Primorsky region, 1 from the Transbaikal region, and 1 from the Union of Cossack Fighters of Russia and Abroad. This looks set to be a source of manpower for Russia in the future, as there are continuing exhortations from Nikolai Deluda to produce more volunteers. But what about the supply side dynamics? Because paramilitarization is not simply limited to this idea of recruiting more soldiers. We argue that this is also a side of this, which is preparing young men for service in military or paramilitary formations, and this goes both through indoctrination and through physical preparedness. In 2022 there were 300,000 people in Cossack-themed educational institutions, and they explicitly venerate patriotic history and physical fitness. It's a coincidence, I'm sure, but the acronym for the Cossack Cadet Corps, those are the elite organisations, is actually KKK. But there are plans to expand the number of Cossack Cadet Corps organisations, and Deluda makes the case here in this quote that it is impossible to carry out fully fledged Cossack cadet education in a multidisciplinary environment, educational institution as proposed by the Arenberg region, because the Cossack component presupposes a completely different regime, a different organisation of the educational process, and different relationships in the team. A Cossack mentor is an obligatory figure here. Along with mastering compulsory disciplines of the main educational programme, the patriotic education of children, their knowledge and observance of Cossack commandments, awareness of what Cossack honour is, Cossack brotherhood, what service to the motherland is also paramount. So just to give you a preview of where I'm going with this, I was interested in the importance of sport to these organisations and how sport was used as a means of physical preparedness. So I collected, I web scraped each one of these websites, creating a corpus of 50,000 articles, and we've begun to analyse them using computational methods. I'm still learning how to do this. My preliminary search on sport shows that the word appears in approximately 2% of the sentences in the corpus, which is actually huge. when we continue that. And so sportsmen are also part of this reserve of youth ready to use violence. So my conclusion is that Cossacks have a great potential as, or great is the wrong word I think, have enormous potential as a recruitment structure. Reports suggest there were 61,000 Cossacks, registered Cossacks, between 18 and 60 in July, with 29,000 in youth organisations, a further 29,000 in youth organisations. So this is a source of future recruits. They're also producing lots of young men skilled in violence, and if the economy collapses, that could have dire consequences and could portend certain futures. There are connections to other private military companies, including Konstantin Pikolov, the leader of the convoy group, actually came from the Black Sea Cossacks. And my final point, I'll stop by saying that during the Wagner mutiny, perhaps the allegiance of these groups is not so secured, because although the accounts and the files have been doctored since the death of since the end of the mutiny, the Don Cossacks did not come out explicitly for Putin as soon as the news broke out, suggesting perhaps there's some greater, more complex picture than would actually be painted otherwise. Thank you for your time.
Yes, so now we have our discussant, Miriam Lanskoy.
Thank you so much. I will do my best to try to pull different pieces together and try to talk about this question of Russia's future and whether we're seeing signs of instability. Let me just thank all the panelists. I thought it's a pleasure to be at PONARS and a pleasure to read your work and have this opportunity to comment. It's really extraordinary what happens here and what comes together. Let me just say that, look, I'm going to state the obvious. We're in a historical inflection point, the dimensions of which we can't foresee. And things that seem very, very unlikely may actually come to pass. And the easiest thing is just to project out everything will remain as it is. And yet that also seems unsatisfactory. I work at National Endowment for Democracy. I talk to a lot of Russian civil society. I interact with people who are kind of deeply engaged all the time, and they have very different, I will talk to one person who I really respect and think, okay, they're brilliant and strategic, and then I talk to someone else and they have a completely different set of expectations. So with all humility, that we go into this, and I would say there are three. Let me throw out three. One is Russia is resilient, it withstands sanctions, the power vertical, center-periphery relations are stable and durable, it has no way back to Europe, it becomes gradually a Chinese satellite. Two, this whole thing is unsustainable, units like the Cossacks go out of control, there's a kind of time of troubles, and again, I have military analysts who watch the multiplication of different private military companies around everything from Russian Orthodox Church to Gazprom to, who say at one point it's not a question of a region peeling away here and there, rather it's these guys are going to go to war over Russia, period. It will be about control of the center that they will all start to divide up. And then the third is that there's an opening, that there's some kind of crisis regime collapses, and then either it breaks up or maybe it finds a way to renew, and maybe there's even an opening that could be a democratic opening that that Russian civil society, democratic forces might be able to find themselves in. So where did our panelists fall? So Edward Holland's paper, Revisiting Arguments about Breakup of the Russian Federation. I found this fascinating because you forced me to recall that we were having all the same conversations in the 1990s. And the way right now we're wondering, is this whole arrangement durable? Aren't there center fleeing forces? Precisely the same conversation was going on then, and it's useful to remind ourselves of that. And I would say that both of you that looked at center periphery really came on the side of durability. Irina Busygina's paper, Center Regional Relations in Russia During the War. Look, this was fascinating, and looking specifically at COVID-19, how cleverly the system adapted. We're not, so I would challenge you this way, that we've seen movements of independent deputies. We saw the Khabarovsk situation earlier. We saw that there's kind of percolating at a very local level that can be difficult to entirely contain. Of course, with the level of repression that's going on now, a lot of that does not seem relevant as it was, say, 5 years ago or 6 years ago. Agree completely that this center periphery, the governors as the basis of the regime, and they produce, of course, conscripts, and in exchange for money, right? In exchange for transfers to the regions and payments to the conscripts themselves. This will come under substantial strain, though, because these same people will have to deliver 80% for Putin, and then likely another mobilization, and this is a real strain. So the system might be quite as durable as both of you say, yet over the next 6 months, we'll see pretty serious exertion of that system. Katie's Stewart and the Karelia example. It's interesting because you mentioned that what might be more interesting is the economic piece rather than the NATO piece, and looked at the sub-state relationships. So the different ethnic activists, environmental activists that have found over time support through the Breakup process and also with Finland. It would be such a shame to lose that. It's some kind of tie between Europe and local activism. Yet with, every time there's more sanctions, there's more, it's understandably why those are there. It has the effect of making it harder for those who are trying to work on indigenous rights, environmentalism, so forth, in these areas. And I'm glad that you're digging into that. I'm okay on time, or should we wind up? Okay, I will. I'm going to do that quickly. Richard Arnold and the case study into the Cossacks. Yes, terrifying, but also shows potential for recruitment. Shows the yet another private military company beyond that one doesn't hear about very often. And I guess I'm wondering, to what degree can it become, does it have this sort of leadership independence? I guess Prigozhin suddenly became, real. Could they, under some scenario, but the implication is that they could, that this could become something completely unhinged. And then we have a bit of optimism in Natalia Forrat's study into Belarus, because I think that is that positive scenario. The Belarusian opposition came out of nowhere. That protest movement came out of nowhere, and the overall recipe, I think there's a lot of wisdom having your paper on this panel, is the implication that don't make this about the West, don't make it kind of anti-Russian, let it be an expression of identity carried by ordinary people. These women were remarkably effective because they could tap into some of the simpler concepts, justice, equality, and so forth. And that it reminds us that a mobilization like that might not be as far away as sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Now we are coming to the Q&A session, so I'll gather questions and then we'll make a couple of tours. So, please.
Hello, thank you. Marjorie Mandelstam-Balzer, Georgetown University. And I have a question to Edward and Irina, if you want to chime in, that brings back something that happened in the earliest panel this morning. And that is, Christina Hook mentioned cascading radicalization. And frankly, while I'm with you in my hopes for a real federalism or some sort of sustainability of the system, another possible serious fear that we now do have on the table is the issues of people, not governors necessarily, but people in republics particularly, who may be feeling something like cascading radicalization. And then on the flip side of that, because people are themselves in the field and in the Far East that I study very conflicted, there's the issue of dependency and the subsidies that you didn't, Edward, really have time to spell out in terms of the implications of what your chart was. So we've got multiple ways to jump, but a potential for true embitterment, partly because of the asymmetrical mobilization and the asymmetrical numbers of people who've been dying in Ukraine who are non-Russians.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I have a question to Natalia. I'm very sympathetic to progressive interpretation of the Soviet legacy, but I also urge to reflect that in the course of the development of the events in Belarus, we've seen another reproduction of the same Eastern-Western polarization, and like I could refer, for example, to Onok and Zase article, I believe in Post-Soviet Affairs, it's actually a whole special issue, where they showed the high correlation between support for Lukashenko and also kind of pro-Russian identity on the other side, support for the protest and for the pro-European or for more like ethnic interpretation of Belarusian identity. So in the course of the development of the events, and perhaps in connection to strong Russian support for Lukashenko, we see this reproduction, and it shows some problem in this kind of the protests which come from nowhere, from nobody expect them. They're poorly organized, they're very loosely mobilized, and so on and so forth. But where this initial ethos of more like inclusive, more like being close to the people and to their urgent concerns, then kind of like displaced by much more exclusive agenda, and that's also a reproduction of what happened in Ukraine, where the initial more inclusive ethos of Euromaidan was pretty quickly displaced by more exclusivist agenda, which also included then decommunization by the post-European government and all the more like ethno-nationalist reforms that followed.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think that yeah, and then, yeah, let's do like this and then.
Hi, Captain Cosman, retired. I wanted to follow up on a question that Margie posed, and she's done a lot of work vis-a-vis Buryatia. But it seems to me it would be very logical if Putin didn't direct or broadly hint to the military that they focus on not only poor parts of the country, but of course many of the poorest areas are also non-Russian. So as a way to, shall we say, purge the Russian population of non-Russians. I hope I'm being too cynical.
Okay, thank you. And one more question. So the last question is yes.
My question is to Natalia. I agree with what Vladimir said, but at the same time, like if we ask why this agenda is touchy, so you describe this logic as rooted in Soviet ethics, but at the same time it is like precisely what is called populism in political theory. So when popular movement build their identity on overcoming particularistic identities and build up like more inclusive, civic, and so if you look at protest movements in Spain or in Northern Africa, so the argument is the same. So in contemporary societies in which class identities, class divisions are like decreasing, so the more universalistic agenda becomes stronger in terms of mobilization capacity. And Euromaidan is the same. So it was called Euromaidan, but in fact, people pretended that so the agenda was indifferent towards geopolitical lines, but it united Ukraine, like, West and East. And so it is interesting to think how this embeddedness in Soviet ethics also is in harmony with quite global phenomenon of populist discourse.
Okay, I think that for now we are start answering questions, so we'll start with Edward.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the questions. I think that what I had to do in the presentation is to gloss over a lot of the regional scale dynamics. And one of the real successes we could say of the Putin regime that I didn't mention was the ability to end the insurgency of the Caucasus. And some of my other work, beyond what I'm talking about today, has been looking at processes of conflict dynamics in the North Caucasus. So in 2007, Kadyrov comes to power in Chechnya. What happens to the insurgency is that it spreads first in Ingushetia and to Dagestan. But really, with the rise of the Islamic State, Russia figured out a way to purge its Islamists and send them to the Middle East to die. And I don't think that is too cynical of an interpretation of how things played out in the Caucasus. And so you get to the point where elements of radicalization that existed in the region had been exported and died in the Middle East. The region for the last, let's say the last decade, has been quite stable in terms of conflict events. My work has looked at 2010 to 2016, a really relatively low level of violence in the North Caucasus during that time. So both of the questions and also the comments that were provided are really looking at what are the possibilities for that level of radicalization to return, right? And it might not be organized around religion, but it might be organized around grievances that are associated with recruitment, particularly in Dagestan, right? I mean, this is one of the only regions in the Russian Federation that has positive population growth, as I mentioned during my presentation. Right? Where will the soldiers come from? Yes, they will come from the poor regions, but they also have to come from places where there's demographic growth occurring. And so that might be my rejoinder to the idea, you know, the purging of the non-Russian population of Russia. This is the demographic reality, and some of the previous comments on previous panels seemed a little less concerned with the demographic situation in Russia. I'm quite concerned. If you look at the population pyramid of Russia, look at the dynamics we have. If you look at the echoes of population, who is going to have babies in Russia today? Who? I'm unclear. No, there is no one. And a lot of people of reproductive age, men, are dying. So, you know, all that said, I think that these are very nice points raised about taking into account other possibilities. Yes, in some ways it's easiest to kind of see the status quo continuing. I think I would certainly acknowledge, and these are great points about other possibilities, but you know, certainly given when I try to look comprehensively across all of the republics, and I've traveled to not all of these places, but a number of them. You know, my experience in the field, looking kind of comprehensively, I would argue for the status quo, at least for now, and then certainly an event could come along to change my opinion and change my perspective, but that's where I'm at right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Natalia, please.
Thanks so much for the questions. I generally kind of agree with what you guys said, both of you. And it's true that the somewhat exclusive agenda replaced the inclusive one in the process of developing that movement. However, when we look at the moment when the movement succeeded in growing, in recruiting more people, it was the inclusive agenda that did it. So this fact, like, of course the divisions still exist, and of course there are some divisions by even class and just generally pro-European versus not like pro-Russian attitudes. But what it teaches us, this case, is that we probably need to develop that inclusive agenda more, because it is the inclusive agenda that allows the movement grow, not the exclusive one, right? It is very unfortunate that the exclusive one took over again, but that's not the reason to stop trying if we're talking about policy implications. And to the question whether this is populism, you know, I agree that now identity issues are definitely at the forefront compared to class issues. There is no doubt about that. But I don't think I agree that populism is always based on this inclusivity. We have a lot of cases in the world now with populism based on pretty racist and exclusive agendas. So this is not necessarily the case of populism. I think when we're talking, when we're comparing Belarus and Ukraine, we need to remember they are very different countries, very different. Much fewer social divisions in Belarus than in Ukraine, much less competitive politics in different kinds of ways. So in this sense, the inclusive agenda feels more organic, I guess, in Belarus, versus in Ukraine, there are more obstacles to developing that agenda, even though society is moving that way and has been moving for a long time. So that's why I don't really think this is general populism, but what I do agree with is that there are some other cases where we see an inclusive agenda actually winning. In Africa, you know, in some other cases, that's definitely true. So this is the question of like really framing. What we are emphasizing in our research is that you need to tap into some existing values, existing cultural, you know, understandings of who we are to that identity. And then you can frame it, you can reinterpret it. You can say, let's say, okay, in Sudan, there was a regime that was very divisive and, you know, emphasizing religious values, what the opposition did, but one of the many things that the opposition did was to rethink what the Islamic values mean. It's not the division, it's actually love to your neighbor, and it's all these other kinds of things. So you're opening up the opportunity for people who used to support the region because of religious values to actually start supporting the opposition, also because of religious values. So that reframing really worked in many cases, as we saw. And I think in terms of policy implications, this is something important to think about for the future, even for Russia, as Miriam said, even though it seems like really remote, but it takes a lot of trial and error to find those points that will resonate. Thank you.
Thank you. Katie, please.
Thank you, Miriam, for those comments. I just want to touch on one aspect of the cultural ties that you mentioned and sort of hope could be maintained. And there are attempts to maintain those, but they're increasingly constrained. I'll just talk about one example. There's the Friendship Society Karelia, Finland, that sort of recently has not been able to get grants to fund its activities, has been losing membership. So while there are still activities in Karelia trying to present Finland as a partner, as a friend, at the official level, that is sort of increasingly constrained in what activities they can effectively do. So I will leave it there.
Okay, yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Miriam, for your comments, and thank you very much for the questions. And I will try to be brief. Miriam, I am also very much, astonished, almost shocked about different perspectives, about the future of Russia. Some say this is resilient and stable. The others say it's very close to collapse. And how should we for things? What shall we take from it? And my idea was probably these people look at different things. Probably these things. So this is, but then this is probably this is the answer. But then I thought that if they look at the same thing, why their perceptions are so different? And my sincere answer, but it's not an answer, but still my feeling is they don't know. They don't know, and I don't know, and we don't know. So we only can make some kind of considerations about this and that. And luckily I'm not doing this, but if I would think about the future of Russia, I would see it as a combination of different things, as a combination of factors. Because I don't believe that one factor will change the future of Russia. It will be a combination of factors which should enforce each other. It will be not about sanctions alone, not about regions alone, not about people alone. It will be about different factors in their particular, very unique combination. And probably it will shoot, and probably it will not. I don't know. And about these regions, Khabarovsk and municipalities, this is yes. Or this story with Furgal. We take this story as a flag and say, here's a different Russia. These are really the people, who they disagree with this government, they want Furgal back, and then the whole story. First, I think this is a different story. But my other idea is that Russia is that large, and this is the problem, that you can find anything. In Russia, you can find anything. You can find the evidence for all your arguments. The problem is, yes, and this is with the local deputies. We all know the story with Alexei Gorinov, right? But for this Alexei Gorinov, there are thousands of municipal deputies that do nothing. So, and this is the problem. So we make a story out of him, put as he would have many heads, but he has only one. So this is okay. So this is I was trying for me the thing that could probably lead to changes would be the signs of any horizontal coordination among the regions, among the governments, among the local communities, and there are none. There are. Good. So this is the. Thank you. So and regarding your question, Margie, so this is about radicalization. This is the group radicalization, ethnic radicalization. Yes, in Russia it is Russia is the country where it is possible. It is possible. It could be a sudden rise in this ethnic radicalization. However, I would say, if I would be asked, I would say that the premise for this radicalization would be the weakening of Moscow. Probably I'm wrong. So, but I think on this popularity that Putin has, it is impossible. But again, what I also, I always trying to answer the question, how this regime that we have in Russia would function when Putin would be less popular. You know, we only know this regime with the highest popularity of Putin. And if it would be still there, but that less popular, what then? You know, we could see many different things which we don't see now. And my very last point is also about radicalization, but this is about non-ethnic radicalization. Because frankly speaking, I have a fear that the more people, and I'm sure, the more people would come from the front, from the war, the more radical would be the regions. Because these people who are now motivated to candidate as deputies, regional deputies, municipal deputies, what kind of legislators we are going to have? That these people who are used to violence, you know, and who want to be treated as heroes, coming from the special military operation. What is this? What we are going to have this society? And this is in the regions, because these people are coming mostly to the regions because they were conscripted from the regions. So this is not. I think this is kind of a very 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 bad thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Okay. Thank you for your question, Miriam. I want to make 3 points. From the discussion, I wanted to say that the Cossacks are an identity movement par excellence. You know, this imitation, this cosplay that they have. You know, really pretending they're Cossacks because they wear the hat and they march around the cities. I also want to say that the implications of the growth in private military companies have implications under all 3 of the scenarios. So if I appeared to lean in favour of one, that wasn't my intention. You know, one example is that Russia decides, you know, that these groups can be exported as a means of interfering in other countries, and the price of violence goes down. So we have an inflammation of conflicts around the world. And thirdly, the question I was asked, to what extent do the Cossacks have the leadership structure to do a Wagner? I'm going to phrase it like that. Yeah, I think the real answer is it's unclear, but I think the implication is that at the regional level, these Cossack organisations do have sufficient structures, but I doubt whether it's there at the national level. So the Kuban Cossacks might have the organisation to protest Kuban deaths against Moscow and Kuban deaths. And also there are important distinctions between each of the Cossack communities. So there's a very distinct Kuban Cossack identity as compared to just a run-of-the-mill Cossack identity in, say, the Central Vojska, which is centered in Moscow.
Thank you, Richard. So we have just one more round of questions. Murat was the first. Yes.
Thank you very much. Very interesting panel. I have a question. Murat Ilyasov, George Washington University. So I have a question to Irina Busygina, and in your presentation, correct me if I didn't understand you correctly. So in your presentation, I understood that you kind of suggest focus for future research to focus on the regions, and that they have to kind of accept their share of responsibility for war in Ukraine. And if it is the case, so what do you mean by region? Because in your further presentation, I didn't read the paper, maybe it is not published yet, but in your further presentation, I understood that you kind of agree that there is vertical of power, and the governors who govern these regions are kind of implementing politics of Putin. So when you talk region, it's kind of, in my mind, it's people who populate the region, not the governors who implement imperial colonial policy there. So if we think regions and we think people, so it brings us absolutely to a different aspect of the communication, and it is kind of generalization that can also bring us to the accusation of all Russians, and that they have to take responsibility for war in Ukraine, even though just because Putin is already for more than 2 decades in power, right? So I just wanted to your clarification on this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
It is, okay, thank you. Dan Goldberg, Institute for Defense Analyses. I just wanted to offer a word of caution about conversations about the ethnic future of the Russian military. The Russian military of defense a few years ago did their own analysis. They looked at 18 to 30-year-old males. I think it was 2016 and 2066. Overall decline of available manpower of about 1 million. And while the ethnic composition shifts a little bit, all those ethnic minority people are still a small percentage of the available military manpower. The fertility rates in the North Caucasus have also been in significant decline, and I expect by the 2030 census that probably none of them will be above replacement level. So that thing is affecting everybody across the board, and given where today's servicemen fighting and dying in Ukraine are coming from, the negative effects of the war will affect their fertility rates going forward as well. And one final point, they're not all from the same ethnic minority group, and so we shouldn't assume that somehow they all have, some common view of the world.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Kendall Byers, Department of Energy. The primary criticism of Russian studies in America is that we engage too much with Moscow and St. Petersburg-based elites. We don't listen to the regions more. And maybe it's hard to get those voices. I guess my question is, how do we listen better to the regions? Where do we look?
Thank you. Any other questions, or we are making the final answers? Yes. Yes, I guess that's all, right? Okay. So yeah, please let's start in the same order. Yeah, please.
Yeah. I think these points are well made about the ethnic minority composition of the Russian military, and certainly I wasn't trying to kind of aggregate all of the national republics into one lump. I think that there are obviously a variety of religious, cultural, national traditions that are present in these places, and so really the advocacy of my work though has been for a particular understanding of place, and in some ways ties into this final question. Advocating for the in-depth and close study of these republics. Kalmykia is a unique place within the European continent. Dagestan is not Chechnya. I think recognizing that is an important element, and that then also ties into these arguments around decolonization. And I've tried to make this point in some of my academic writings to say, look, if we're serious about decolonizing Russian studies, what does that entail? That entails a view from the margins of the state, from the ethnic republics, and getting expertise into these particular areas beyond painting a broad brush picture of national republics or the Russian Federation as it stands.
There weren't really any specific questions to me, but I think I can address the last question, how to listen better. So I think there is actually plenty of good scholarship on Russian regions. The problem is that we don't see, active regional politics at the federal level, and that's why it's not really in the news all the time, just, in a similar way as in some other countries. So I think it just takes a proactive reach for those pieces, for those researchers and scholars who do study Russian regions. It is available, it's just not in this informational kind of background that we usually receive.
I'll take that last question as well. Well, it used to be you go there and talk to people in the regions. My 5-year ban is technically over at this point, but I don't foresee going back anytime soon. So unfortunately, this is a real issue with trying to understand Russia at the moment is that access that we can't have. So I think my presentation today, sometimes it's cobbling together regional media or public opinion polling data with all the caveats of the media is controlled and filtered, and public opinion, how much preference falsification is there. So it is there, but it is increasingly restricted and difficult to get.
Thank you for these two fantastic questions. I will start answering with what Marat accused me in something that I didn't mind, sure. So this is, but first about responsibility. But this is, it is, you know, somehow. I think these people are responsible. Marat, can you hear me? They are all of them, me including. They are responsible. They are not guilty. But they are all responsible for what is going on, and in particular that the Putin sits now 23 years, you know, and this is the feeling of responsibility that is inside you, you know, somehow you just live with it. So, but this is one thing, and the other thing is that I mixed incumbent governor and the regional population. This critique I accept. Yes, sure. But this is, I just go together with a lot of literature, because if you read the literature on the regions, you know, the people, the authors, they write regions. They're regions, all. We will talk about this. I will show you. So, this is yes, but they're meaning authorities. They're meaning all the time, they're meaning governments, at least, and this is not good. You know, this is not correct. We need to make a kind of a separation between the regional authorities and the regional population, but not with regards to the question of responsibility. This would be my answer. And regarding the question, how can we better listen to the regions? I have a different kind of proposal. I have a different proposal because I think there are probably many, and probably too many, those who study particular regions. I know wonderful people who are doing wonderful research on Caucasus. You know, on particular regions, on Siberia, on the Far East, you know, they are Westerners. They are not only Americans, but they are also Europeans. And this is all good. And I don't think we need more. I don't think it's. I think it's enough. So, and this is good quality. This is anthropology. No, this is ethnology. You know, political ethnology or something like this. They are going. They are making field trips, research, talking, opinion polls. You know, writing books. So this is good. But you know, my idea would be that the regional dimension, just regional dimension, should be involved into any discussion on Russia. This is not about special regions and special who is the governor of what, you know. But just you talk about the changes in Russia, should talk about the regions. You talk about modernization in Russia, talk about regions. The end of the war, what does it mean to the regions? So this is not about particular regions, but it is regions. Regions should be everywhere. Just take Russia as a point. So, and not about particular regions. Thank you. I don't know. Do you understand what I mean?
We hope so.
Because я уже сама.
Okay, Richard?
Yeah, I would just like to respond to the where do we get stuff from the regions on. I just second what my colleague said, and yeah.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just asking our discussant whether she wants to reflect somehow, and then no, she doesn't.
I think it's been a great day.
Yes, it's been a great day, and the fascinating panel and the presentation, so thank you very much, everyone. Which was today the celebration of all kind of mysterious and important processes within Russia and outside of Russia. Thank you very much, PONARS Eurasia. It was a pleasure of being here and listening.